Hi everyone, welcome to Podcast Property. My name is Rob Holmes,
And I'm Tom Webster.
and today we've got Patrick Dougherty on from Iver London. On the Instagram, it's Iver IVAR London official, and he is talking to us all about high-end, super prime location properties in London. So I'm going to let Tom tell you a little bit more about him because it's one of Tom's contacts.
So it says, so I've known Patrick for must be, God, I'd say this is how long I've been in finance for. It's got to be at least 8 years now, since, because he was actually one of my very first clients when I bought Fordyce and Plough, the mortgage brokerage. So he was an old client of George's that I bought a business from, and he was actually one of the first clients that I looked after. So me and Patrick always gone really, really well, really, really nice guy. Always very big mortgage sizes, so it was a really good, really good client to have. But the interesting story about Patrick, and obviously he'll explain in a bit more detail how he come about it, but he was a proper high flying lawyer at a really, really prestigious practice. So we're talking like his whole life is set out for him. He's going to be very, very wealthy. He's very well educated. He's in that career path that's just, the future is golden. And he actually rang me up and said, "Oh, Tom, I'm thinking about knocking my legal stuff on the head and just going full time into property." And at this time he had his residential and one buy to let. And I was like, now's not the time, Patrick. I think you need a little bit more experience and build yourself up. And he, fortunately for him, he completely ignored me.
He didn't take your advice.
He didn't. He handed his notice in, and he went literally full belt and braces into property. And you've got to respect people like that. That is, and again, when you're in that environment of, let's say, the legal profession, you think how many years he's studied to become that. And again, his whole life, he's probably thinking, this is the direction I'm going to take. And he said to himself, I don't love it. I like it and I'm enjoying it, but I don't love it. And I love what I'm doing with the property. I'm gonna take the plunge.
And you know what, you can, for the listeners, you got a really good episode coming up. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think even at one point I say to Patrick, you can really feel the passion in what he's saying and what he's talking about, what he's doing with his life and with property.
Oh, big time.
It's really nice
you can
to hear.
hear it in his voice. And you know, like I could literally talk to somebody about anything if they love what they're talking about. And yeah. Patrick's one of those people that you could
Patrick
talk to. He can talk, yeah. but he's one of those people that he is fascinating because he's talking from passion. Like I could literally go and speak to someone that loves sandpaper and talk to them about an hour for sandpaper if they love it. Do you know? So sometimes you get these people who just have these passions, and it really comes across. And he's learned some really big lessons. He sort of imparts some of the knowledge that he's taken, some tips and some tricks that he's learned from his time doing what he's been doing. And we also talk about some of the things that he thinks that he could have done better and things that he could have done differently. But yeah, no, you've definitely got a really interesting episode lined up. There's a couple of, just to give you a bit of a heads up, there's a couple of dips and stuff. So we are going to do our best to edit the episode, or Martin is actually not. It's not going to be us. It'll be Martin that do it. But we're going to do our best to edit because of the internet connection sometimes comes in and out. But it shouldn't affect the listening. So just be aware of it. But it should be fine. But yeah, you're going to enjoy this one. Anything to add there, Rob? Before I
No, wicked. Let's go.
Cool. And then if you want to follow us, as always, you can catch us on all the socials at Podcast Property. Catch us on YouTube as well. So if you wanted to actually see our faces rather than to listening to our voices, you can. And yeah, no. And the big one for us is reviews and stuff. So if you can leave us a review on anything that you're listening or watching us on, that would be a massive, massive bonus for us. So thank you so much for everyone that is supporting us so far. And if you're new, welcome to the show. And I hope you enjoy the episode that's coming up. Cheers, guys. Good morning, Patrick.
Hello, good morning.
How are you? Well?
I'm really well. How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, very well. Thank you very much. Long time no see.
Yeah, it must be years, huh?
I know. I was just saying, I think the last time we saw each other was when was at your Centrepoint development.
Yeah, that was it's so much fun to be able to show people finally the sort of stuff that I've been working on.
Oh, it was incredible, to be fair. It's one of those places you walk into and just everything's wow. Like even to the point that you go into the kitchen and you had the sink and then you had like the ice bucket next to the sink ready for the champagne.
It's also a fun building because obviously the building was put up in the 60s and it used to be an office building, and they had at the top of it a bar. And for anyone who's been in London over a period of time, like most people seemingly seem to have at least been to that bar once. So for a lot of people who came to see the apartment, there were lots of sort of like smiles giggles about sort of how they spent their night at that bar.
Oh, fantastic. Well, those drunken lift rides up and down. So the way we like to start the show is we ask our guests to sort of introduce themselves, give us a bit of history about you, what your career path, and sort of what's brought you to who you are today. So just take it away.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Patrick, and I trained as a lawyer, and I worked in the city for a number of years in finance, which I enjoyed. I always knew that I was going to do something more entrepreneurial, and I think I fell into property is probably the right way of putting it, because most people, I was renting a flat when I was a sort of a trainee. And then I sort of got to that stage when I wanted to buy my first property, and, I was tired, needed a bit of work. And so I sort of got into it, right? And I kind of quite enjoyed the whole process of thinking, how's it going to look like? How am I going to do this? How much does it cost? Pulling the contractors together. And it was that sort of mix of, a little bit of nightmare, to be honest, but at the same time, quite fun. And the result was just really satisfying at the end. I think a lot of people go through that process, and for some people, it's like, never, ever again will I ever do my... For a certain group of people, and myself included, it's like you sort of get the bug. And so I kind of moonlighted for a number of years after that, while I was working as a lawyer, sort of, refurbishing a flat every couple of years or something, normally my own home, and then on. And then it sort of got to a stage where I got sort of a few people, sort of friends of friends, and a couple of random investors who sort of approached me and said, "Look, we've seen some of the projects that you've sort of worked on, and if you were ever to sort of go full time, we'd be really interested in sort of backing you and giving you financing so that you can sort of go off and do your thing." And that's really how Iceberg London, which is the business I run, started. Was focusing in on the sort of central London market. Mainly sort of like the 1, 2, 3 bed part of it, particularly, and sort of getting involved in sort of buying, refurbishing, and sort of selling. So quite a simple business model. I think the angle I always took, because I was doing this as in a way, I did a very sort of, a lot of people say is very brave and not to be recommended, but I sort of tried to, when I left law, I left to sort of pursue what had become a hobby, even maybe a passion.
So I remember you doing it because I was your advisor at the time, so mortgage advisor. Yeah. And Patrick comes to me and says that I'm thinking about chopping in my really well-paying, steady legal career that's going to go through the roof to go into property. And I was like, I think you're mad.
A lot of people have that reaction, and probably to this day. Sort of say, in fact, even just this weekend, there was someone sort of like, do you think you made the right decision? And the answer I have is always the same thing, which is that, and it was ultimately why I left, which was that I wanted the opportunity to do something that I would really genuinely enjoy. And that's a kind of a quite big philosophical question for who you are as a person, right? Because a lot of people say it's quite a risky thing to try and pursue something you enjoy rather than something that pays the bills or something that you're more obviously good at. So obviously I trained as a lawyer, so you're right. It was and is a big decision that I took there.
Joe, it's super brave, and especially something like a lawyer as well, because you think how many years you would have studied to get to yourself to the position you were. And you was at a really, really prestigious practice, like it's almost like your whole life is written in front of you, isn't it? Is you will at a stage you become a partner, and then this and then that, and before you know it, you're just sitting in a really nice, comfortable lifestyle. But you decided actually that's not what I love doing, so let's go and do something I love. And that's incredibly brave, and obviously it's worked out. It's paid dividends since.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, it's funny you put it like that, because it's exactly how it was. It was, the problem for me was that I kind of reacted negatively to this feeling of, as I put it, the conveyor belt. I sort of felt like I could sort of see my life mapped out in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, all the way to my sort of, my deathbed. So, and I think probably a lot of people, I guess, it depends on who you are as a person, right? Because I think for a certain type of person, you'd give your right arm for that kind of predictability, right? Because it just means you just don't worry, you can pay the mortgage, you can, look after your kids, and you can go on your 2 holidays a year, right? And you kind of have a nice steady life. But I was one of those people that I think I wanted the uncertainty, if I'm honest. I wanted that feeling that I had ventured and actually built something. And it's a different part of the brain. It's not it's not rational, to be honest. I mean, that's why everyone, your reaction there, Tom, and to be honest, everyone, that's slightly nuts. And reality is, yeah, they're right. It's not, what they mean by nuts is that it's not logical, because logical means you think what's gonna, on balance, give you the best possible return. But it excludes one thing, and that's how you feel, and that's how that decision about who you want to be as a person. And that's the bit that it doesn't quite address, and that's ultimately why I left, and that's sort of the that ingredient.
Where do you think that comes from inside yourself? So is that a family thing? Is that something you was brought up with, or is that just something that you found yourself? Or
no, it's kind of an interesting question, because I everyone in my family is like really, really cautious, conservative, like doctors, lawyers, accountants, military types, that kind of thing. So there's not really a tradition in the family of entrepreneurship. So I think everyone was really quite worried about it as well. Everyone's like, everyone knows the risks, right? Because obviously you get the stories of people who smash it, but there's also the stories of people who struggle, right? So yeah, it's really hard to explain. It was just something. It's my own, it was my own, I guess, internal attempt at sort of creating meaning. And I think that was the problem. But I never disliked law, and I kind of enjoyed it, and I really respected everyone I worked with, and really liked them, and to be honest, had a really good time. But there was something sort of missing. I felt like I didn't get a deep satisfaction from working on a contract. A good lawyer facilitates other people's decisions.
Yeah.
And I realized was that I wanted to be the one facilitating the decisions. Even though I was working on sort of occasionally $1 billion loans with banks and governments and what have you, sort of prestige and very big sums of money, and lots of bright people involved working really hard. For me, there was more satisfaction to be had to be working on a £1 million deal or a £2 million deal, and with me being in sort of in the focus of being the one who puts it all together. And that's the thing I really find. But they are really quite challenging, these projects that that we do. That they sound sort of simple, don't they? Sort of, just refurbishing an apartment. But actually, what does that involve? That involves getting investors. Or why is the investor going to involve? Do they need some sort of prospectus or some sort of documentation talking about the London market? Explaining how you're going to do it. Does it need tax advice? Where are these investors coming from? Are they from Hong Kong? Are they from the Caribbean? Are they from the UK? Are they from Switzerland? Different rules apply. What's the best structure of putting that together? Which property would you buy and why? Is it is it because of a relative argument? Is it because of the area? Is it because of the type of property? How are you actually going to do this refurbishment? Which contractors are going to use and why? Which design are you going to run with and why? What's going to maximize it? How are you going to sell it? Are you going to dress it or are you not going to? The number of sort of permutations and ingredients that go into creating the successful turn is actually huge, and it's quite complicated. It's like almost, I'd say, like a three-dimensional sort of puzzle. And then imagine multiplying that by doing a number of projects at the same time. And actually, it's strange, but I'd actually say that the role I see myself doing today is like, just as challenging, in a slightly different way, but it's just as challenging as anything I was doing at the law firm. So that's sort of, one of those misnomers, I think, a bit as well, is that people are like, working with this law firm, doing these really complicated deals, and now you just flip that. I just wouldn't categorize that. I'd say that actually the way I see it is it's quite surprisingly complicated pulling these transactions together, and getting a successful outcome.
And the difference now is the responsibilities on your shoulders, whereas like where you're a lawyer, like, yeah, there are responsibilities, but ultimately the client makes that decision. Whereas now you are the decision maker. So everything's now resting on you. The stress is yours to have, rather than finishing work at 5 o'clock and going home. It doesn't finish at 5 o'clock.
Yeah. And many other day when I wish it wasn't like that, but that is the reason I have to just pause, and just remind myself why I did all this. And reality is that's exactly actually what I wanted at the end of the day. Was I wanted that uncertainty, and I wanted that sort of having to make a decision, having to sort of weigh up. And that does, you're absolutely right, it creates a stress, because it's sort of like, well, do we do this? Do we do that? There are so many permutations, right? But for me, that's also what makes me feel alive, and what makes it really exciting and sort of fun. It feels like real sort of venturing.
Patrick, you're as you said, focusing on the London market, and you just went over how there's quite a few different things that you have to take into account. And if one part moves, this part moves over here, then you've got to make a decision here, which affects this bit over here. Can you talk us through maybe a live deal or one you've done previously, and take the listeners through a journey of a deal from start to finish and the types of decisions that you were making and why along that specific deal?
Yeah, sure. So the thing when you're involved in property, right, and I think anyone who invests will sort of recognize this straight away, is that property is capital intensive. You know, you need a lot of cash, right? And that cash can come to you in different ways. You can have sort of the equity, and you can have the debt. The equity is the investor's money, you know, or your own money, and the debt is, you know, typically is a sort of a bank loan or a mortgage, right? And the reason I start the answer in the way, you know, to the question you put like that, is because it essentially drives everything, right? But if you want to play this game of sort of, you know, turning properties, or, you know, and buying and refurbishing and selling, then you need to know where that money is coming from. So actually, the first thing that I would do before going out sort of, you know, shopping, if you like, would be to understand my investors and to understand what they would want to have. And this is sort of where it gets interesting, because what you find is that, you know, so many people there's so many different types of style of investing. You know, is it value investing? Is it sort of, you know, or is it sort of, is it more cautious investing? So for example, you know, some investors want maximum possible capital gains. Well, that drives you to areas that are on the up, you know, areas that can be booming and growing very, very quickly indeed. So, you know, a Croydon, maybe, you know, at the moment, or, you know, some other parts of town where they've been, you know, relatively affordable for a long period of time, and suddenly, you know, there just becomes this momentum, and people get behind it, and they want to sort of, you know, invest. You also get other types of investor who are, you know, more about steady as she goes, you know, investing in what they know, and that drives you more towards like central London, you know, or prime central London. You get certain types of investor that we sort of work with from around the world, where it's almost like, you know, if it ain't Mayfair or Knightsbridge, they're not interested, you know, because that's what they know. You know, they're not from this country, but they've been to the UK a lot, and this is where they tend to sort of have their meetings and you know, stay in their hotels, and they feel comfortable putting capital into these areas. So the first thing really on this sort of journey is to understand your investor, and to understand what kind of an investment they'd actually be interested in. So to take an example there, you know, I did, you know, one project, so it's the one I'll work on, is sort of a bunch of investors who wanted exposure to sort of, you know, basically prime or / super prime central London, right? They want to do an apartment there. So that immediately then narrowed down my search in terms of type of unit that I'd be looking for. And then obviously you want to understand the kind of, you know, value that they were interested in doing. And so then suddenly, you know, from being like, you know, the whole of the UK, or, you know, Greater London, to being, you know, do we do a new build, or do we try and buy some land and get development rights on it? If the whole thing narrowed right down to being, actually, no, we're going to buy an existing unit, single unit probably, with potential for, you know, significant capital gains while we're doing it, but in an area that they recognize, right? So that's, in this case, it ended up being sort of Mayfair. The next thing that we then looked at was, and this is obviously where the money is, right? Is the sort of the dollar shot. Is sort of where's the opportunity, right? And this is where it gets really interesting in I think in prime central London and stuff, because, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was a lot of mismatch of information. There wasn't a perfect information in the system. You know, you didn't really have the internet. You didn't have Rightmove. You didn't have Zoopla. So people were sort of, you know, you had the different agencies. People would run around with different agencies, you know, and trying to spot an opportunity. Whereas now, you know, I'd say that the information maybe isn't perfect, but actually the market's pretty transparent, especially in somewhere like prime central London, where everyone who owns anything in those areas knows that the assets are really valuable. So how do you make your money? How do you find the opportunity? And the way I describe that is actually that I think that what you're doing is not necessarily expecting to buy something that isn't at market value. Instead, you're buying something that is at market value, but you take the view that the market value is wrong. And that, in essence, is sort of, you know, I'd say probably like the core of our business, is that you end up taking a view. You end up getting to know your market really, really well. And you just know that that building has always achieved a certain price per square foot, or relative to the rest of the street, or relative to its neighborhood. It's always achieved that sort of pricing. But why? And that's where the fun starts. It's like, do you then take that on and say, well, be that as it may, that is the correct pricing, but I think it's wrong because have you seen how that neighborhood on the side has started outperforming? Have you seen that development down the street? Have you seen that single development, in the same building, but has suddenly done something quite differently? Or have you seen a change in trend? For example, now, of course, we have, COVID has sort of absolutely turbocharged areas like St. John's Wood and Hampstead. They always used to trade at a sort of, it's quite a significant discount to certain other areas in more prime parts or central parts of London. But because of COVID, sort of things have changed. So that's probably the next stage, I'd say, in terms of the ingredient to finding something is sort of, what's the angle? Where's the story?
There's a huge learning point there, isn't there? Because I think that's one of the things that sort of, it again permeates throughout the whole industry, is you need to know your area, know your market. So like, if it doesn't matter where you live in the country, there'll be opportunities on your doorstep, and you are always better off investing in something that as best as you can. Rob knows because he was involved in the deal, but we invested in a deal in Exmouth, and we're in Brighton. You're talking 3 or 4 hours away. We know a small amount about the area. It's a great buy, but you've got that massive gap where you just don't have the knowledge and you don't have the resources to be there all the time. Turning that back and say, actually, on your doorstep, there are opportunities, and you can recognize opportunities better because you have a better knowledge than maybe some other people. There's a big learning point there.
Yeah, Tom, you're absolutely right. I mean, I sort of joke with some of my sort of investors sometimes, but, the question you have to put yourself is, do you know an opportunity if it's slapping you in the face? That's the problem sometimes. Sometimes you'll be looking at something, do you understand, is it expensive, or is it fairly priced, or is it actually the bargain that, you've been looking for the last 2 years? And actually, to understand that, you really need to know your market. So Tom, you're absolutely right, because it's all the nuances in there, isn't it? It's really taking on the market. And I don't know how you feel about that, Tom, but that's certainly how I characterize it, is that, certainly in central London, that it's less about necessarily trying to think that the market's that the item is simply wrongly priced. It's more that you are buying it at the correct price, but you've got an insight that gives you an edge to the market.
Yeah, big time. I don't know if you're comfortable talking about numbers or anything, but are there any deals that spring to mind where you felt like you bought something at a good price, and if you're comfortable to go through numbers, sort of what they were?
Yeah, I mean, like, I give you a couple of examples, but some that particularly memorable are sort of when you're buying, or sort of turn them into 100, but buying at 100, but you end up sort of selling at 170 or 180. I mean, you've got your turn cost, right? And so you've got to. I think also just taking a step back, what I would sort of say is like, what are you sort of aiming for in London? And I think you'd always be, any investor, I think, right, you're aiming for probably a 20%, and then if you can do better than that, then you're doing really, very well. But you want to be aiming probably for at least a clean turn, right? And remember, what that means is that you are probably aiming to sell it for somewhere between 40 and 50% more than you bought it for, to be cleaning up 20-25%. So, you've got your work cut out if you think that the market's, correctly pricing things, right, to get that right. And so obviously to get a return that's even bigger than that is frankly almost astonishing, right? So yeah, I mean, when you're getting a sort of a return of say 50%, which is obviously a couple of the, more, exciting returns that I've had, then, and in, 12, 15 months sort of orders, and that's really exciting stuff. And, yeah, that would be the order of magnitude when they go as well as we want. I would throw in straight away, by the way, that one is how well do you do when they go really, really well, but also how do they perform when the market's slowing and when you're sort of trying. And that for me is almost like my biggest pride, is that always made money. Like I think the lowest return we've ever had was sort of 10 years, and it took 3 times longer than we wanted, and London's. Central London has gone through a slow patch over the last number of years, until that last year, probably until sort of the end of November. And
the thing with London as well, because the numbers are bigger, the swings are bigger. So when it goes up, and when it goes down, it really goes down.
So yeah. I think that's the thing. I think the other thing to look out for, I guess, is sort of the cost of doing this business, right? Is sort of the cost of turnover, and that's kind of where government comes into play here, right? Because they are all powerful in this, right? That stamp duty has it's tripled, and that's obviously less. That really depends then on. It's less of an issue if your price point is £200,000 for an apartment, but if your price point is 1.5 million or 2 million, which obviously is a huge amount of money, but at the same time, when you're in central London, it ends up being a 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartment, right? So it ends up being kind of a almost run of the mill is a strong word, but it ends up being kind of nothing necessarily out of the ordinary, right? It's kind of simply just what the prices are like. Then suddenly the costs of turning a property start becoming really very significant, because ultimately, who's going to pay that stamp duty? It's not you, right? As a flipper, you're passing that to the end buyer. So the end buyer is going to be paying stamp duty again. They're going to be paying your stamp duty. They're going to be paying for the cost of refurbishment, and they're paying for for the margin that you're looking to make. And so it means that either you're buying it exceptionally well and getting your your ducks in a row, and the like we've been discussing, or the product you've done is so frigging good that you can get that little bit over the market, or that much over the market, because someone thinks it's worth it. And that's
do you think that's where you come into the market? Because obviously I've seen firsthand the standard that you deliver. Do you feel like because you're delivering such a high spec that you are actually squeezing a little bit more out of what the property is worth?
So yeah, Tom, I mean, absolutely. And I think it's a great question, because it also then ties into, again, just different styles of investing. Because remember, there's so many different styles, right? Are you into land? Are you into doing holes in the ground? Are you into extensions? And actually, funnily enough, the way that I've run my business has actually been, we've never really done extensions. We've never really increased square footage, which is the classic way of adding value, right? We've always done it by looking at the market value of the asset we're buying. That's the number one value add potential. The second one is looking at the way that the product, that the asset, the flat, the house is configured, because it's incredible, right? How you can create a sense of a sense of space, or you can create a sense of value. And people know that they're buying the square footage, but you can't help it. If you go in and something is just epic, you can't help it. You're going to just have a slightly higher valuation on that than otherwise. And if you think that your profit as a developer, it's always at the end of a project, right? If you can squeeze an extra 3%, 5%, 10%, that's pure profit. And so you're absolutely right, but it isn't, it isn't a coincidence that when you, and thank you for those kind words, that when you've been through apartments that you say very deliberately, because that's exactly right. We're trying to buy them really well, so that's value add one. But at the other end, we're also trying to squeeze more at the end by really presenting them well, because we're not adding square footage, right? We're making them flow well. We're making them feel bigger than they actually are. We're making them feel really contemporary and allowing people to live in the way that they want to, and just giving them that home that actually is just that little bit of over and above what we would typically expect to get from standard development, or from buying a second home.
Amazing. So what would you say Iver London does? So if you used to say, right, so this is our business, this is what we do, what would you say in a nutshell is who Iver London is?
Yeah, I'd say we create gorgeous homes that you want to live in, basically. It's as simple as that, but that kind of is, I think, what it ends up being. That we have, at this stage now, we have quite a lot of customers. But what I really like of the fact that we have a significant portion of our customers are repeat customers. They keep coming back, and that means that we must be doing something right. And I think that's for me what it boils down to, is that ultimately, one of the things that's happened, in the last number of years, Tom, is like, people are really talking about sort of, mental well-being and how we feel, emotionally. And, this is kind of a relatively recent thing in the UK, right? In the last 10, 20 years, and the home is like one of the biggest things that's going to change how you feel. It has a massive impact on how you relate to your partner or to your wife, and how you interact with your kids and your family. And now that people have been working from home as well, like having a setup that makes you feel uplifted and makes you feel positive about life, happy, content. These are, these are big things actually, and good design really has that difference. I always think of like Johnny Ive, the Apple, designer, right? When he talks about his products, right? In a way, it's a computer, it's a phone, but it's amazing because people are using them all the time. And it's that pleasure, that tactile nature of them that gets people to feel good. And to draw inspiration from some of that stuff he says, it's like, that's really, I think, what Ivor is about, right? And so it's about creating homes that people really want to live in. And so, but then functionally, what does that translate as? Well, we started creating homes, turnkey homes that we then can sell. It's like, ready to go. And it's off the back of that, all the core ingredients have been broken out. So for example, when you're doing a turnkey home, well, you need to find the home in the first place. So we now have people who come to us to help them find a home. That's our home search service, right? We're always focusing on value on that. It's just one of the things, because we do the development, we're just really sharp on that. And then the second one is sort of design and build, because obviously once we found a project, we need to then do the designs, the plans, get the permissions, project manage, get the right tradesmen and getting the right quality level in. And again, we now have people, and quite a big part of our business now is actually people coming to us saying, look, I've got a home. Can you make it really nice? Can you do what you're doing on your website? And then the last one is probably the one that is the most sort of crazy, if you like, but it's sort of the one that in some respects probably the most passionate about, which is sort of the furniture. Because obviously once you've done this apartment, right, and refurbished it, we've always dressed them. We never sell apartments or homes that we do in central London empty. And the reason for that is because we always think that they just present that much better when they're furnished. You don't have to have the imagination to think, where would everything go if I was to buy this unit? Instead, you come in and you just think like, oh yeah, crap, there's the sofa, there's the TV, coffee table, dining table. I get it. Yeah, it all makes sense. Yeah, I can see someone's thought about this. And that's the point we have. So we must make sure that it's completely clear on how you use it. And also, you put in nice art, you put in nice contemporary furniture. People know they're not buying it, if they don't want to, but you can't help but it does, it just rubs off on the actual development itself. And remember, you get that extra 1%, 2%, 3% at the end. It's pure profit.
And it's really rare to find as well. So like when anyone's a common person just looking for a home, 99% of the time you're going to look at it and go, actually, I don't like that. Don't like that. Kitchen's got to go. Where's my furniture going to go? You all have to have that conversation because no one's style's the same. But genuinely, and it's not me just blowing smoke. It's when I went to that Centre Point one, that's probably the only place I've ever been gone, if I had the money, I would just throw my money and just have it exactly as it is. Because you, like you said, you as soon as you walked in, there was the atmosphere and the environment and everything was just so well considered and thought out that you couldn't do any better than what you'd already done. So whereas you usually walk into a house and go, actually, I can do better than this. Where you walk into your one and say, I can't do any better than this. This is as good as it can get.
It's kind of you. I mean, I'd say that is, by the way, a top tip that I would throw in there is that the furniture doesn't come at the end, or at least a layout. It's right at the beginning. When we're thinking about the refurb and thinking about how we're going to knock walls around or whatever, or doing the sockets or, whatever, light switches, it's how is it actually going to be finished? And I feel like, if I dare say it, it's like this is sometimes where architects go wrong. Is I feel like, brilliantly talented and trained, individuals, but sometimes they just stop without necessarily thinking about how it's going to be when it's completely and utterly finished. And that's where the sort of slightly OCD nature of our sort of business comes in. But it's like, we want to know where everything is going, because then, as you say, it just feels right. But it's not a surprise because we know that because it was on the plan. And we've got to, that's another thing. Like, you can read the plan. The more you can read a plan, the more you know how the future is going to look. And that for me is one of the things I really enjoy about this business as well, right? Is I read plans, like I visualize it, I visualize how these things are going to look. And that's where you can genuinely add value, right? Because you can create that sense of flow. Where's the source of light coming from? How do you create that sense of space? How do you use that nook, which is a waste? All this sort of stuff, right? It comes from looking at that plan, right? And yeah. study the
Can
plan.
you can you tell us a bit more about Centrepoint? Because obviously you've mentioned it, Tom's mentioned it a couple of times. The listeners aren't going to know what that is. I made a note that it was an office building from the 60s that had a bar at the top. So can you just kind of tell us more about the building, how you came across it as a deal, like what you did with it, you know, the numbers, all of that sort of stuff. Let's use that as a deal example.
Yeah, so I'd actually say that just to answer that last bit first is that Centrepoint was not actually a development from our point of view. It was a more a reflection. Business had been growing to the extent that we get customers on for pure sort of interior design and furnishing, and that's what this was. So taking a step back, Centrepoint was a building I think put up in the 1960s. It's on the corner, for people who know London, of sort of Oxford Street and Tottenham Court Road. And it is in what you might call the brutalist style. So a lot of people think it's butt ugly, basically. Personally, I love it. And actually this kind of style, of course, has become really fashionable again. So it was an architect called Richard Seaford, and he was quite prolific. He was quite controversial at the time because he put up quite big buildings and they were quite in your face. It's probably a fair category. But you know, it's so it went through a difficult life. It was empty. It was basically a flip. It was basically a development that was a gamble by the developer who put it up. It was empty for many years. There was a lot of issues around sort of homelessness around the bottom. And so it had quite a mixed reputation. It had a bar at the top for a while. And so, as we were saying, that, you know, it's quite fun, quite sweet almost, because like, it just seems like pretty much every Londoner has sort of been to that bar. And then it was bought by a developer called Al McCanter, I think probably about 10 years ago. And also, and that's a sort of a family basically backed by 3 or 4 European families, I think, including the Agnelli family, which is, you know, the owners of Fiat. So, you know, pretty serious investment. And they decided to convert the building into a series of apartments. So 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom apartments, and then an incredible penthouse at the top. And so one of our, in fact, a couple of our clients bought properties in that building. And, you know, luckily for us, or fun for us, was that, you know, these were pretty epic apartments. They were sort of like half plate, so sort of a half a floor size. You know, and one of them I think was like on the 30th floor, and, you know, the other one, I don't know, 28th or 27th or something. So incredible views and just so cool, basically, right? You know, on McCanter, I think they used Conran for the you know, for the interiors to help them with the kind of, you know, the building scheme interiors. And we were brought on then by the sort of the buyers of these particular units to sort of basically do a showcase, right? To do something that's really quite particular. And then again, if you've got these kind of budgets to buy these kind of units, you know, people want something that's different, and they want sort of furniture and a look that you can't just copy paste from somewhere else. And so, yeah. So
what was the budgets for these properties then?
The
reason I ask is because the listeners are going to want to know. I want to know.
Buying the apartments, or
both for buying an apartment. For instance, buying an apartment as it was, the kind of spend that would go into it, and then what it would be worth at the end of it.
Yeah. So I think, you know, and I think this is sort of, you know, public knowledge. I think the pricing is available on the, you know, on the website, so I'm not divulging anything here. But yeah, I think that they'd probably be in the region of sort of, you know, 8-9 million, somewhere between 8 and 9 million pounds. You know, so pretty serious pounds per square foot. It's fair to say. I think, you know, the way they were marketed, or are being marketed, are, you know, is the basis that, you know, it's first of all, the whole building has been, you know, converted to absolutely everything is new. They offer sort of, you know, a concierge that is sort of second to none, and, you know, there's a swimming pool and gym and cinema, but also just the most epic views. And as I say, that's sort of, again, one of these things that drives, you know, what, you know, when you're interested in this line of business, you always ask yourself, what is it that creates value? How do you value? And one thing that drives value is rarity. And that's what, you know, I think Centrepoint is a play on, is that, you know, one of the things that drives value is rarity value, right? Is rarity factor. And so one of the things with the Centrepoint, as you probably noticed, Tom, was how the view is, I mean, first of all, it's epic, right? But what makes it special is that you're in the center of town, and the view is unimpeded. And that's what makes it so rare. And it was east, and it's to the west. And so that's kind of was the angle on the building. And in terms of the budgets we had to work on, well, I think we had again,
look at you try not to laugh. Look at the smile on your face.
Budget of, you know, probably sort of north of 150,000 for the for furniture and interiors. So yeah, it was a good solid budget.
Money well spent. And the thing with Ivor, like you mentioned, like your big passion project at the moment is the furniture side of things. So how did you get involved in that? What sort of led you down it? Because I find it really interesting that not only you're delivering the homes, but you're delivering the furniture as well. And that's something that a lot of developers don't do. And there's something there's a major part of like the purchasing. And if you can control that part of the chain. Yeah.
I mean, Tom, I'll answer it in two ways. I think, first of all, furniture is a really hard industry, you know, so it makes a lot of sense for a developer not to get involved in furniture because it's complicated enough as it is. And I think the reason I've got involved with it, to be honest, is because, you know, I really enjoy it, and it's sort of like a passion, and it's basically a little bit of a hobby. And you know, and also the strange thing is though, is that, so I've been doing it really more for sort of passion. And what we used to do was that, you know, we'd do, you know, these apartments and these refurbishments, and then to get it just right, we'd usually commission a couple of pieces of furniture that would fit and be just the right size or just the right color. And what we realized after a while was that actually we've done quite a lot of pieces, and we've actually been designing these ourselves. And, you know, wouldn't it be fun if we actually started getting these, you know, properly, you know, photographed and put together? And then, you know, I guess that was kind of like the kernel then suddenly of our collection. And then something kind of strange started happening, because, to be honest, you know, most of the time when we're doing these refurbishments, we don't necessarily use our own furniture. You know, our own furniture is quite expensive because it's, you know, it's handmade, you know, there are no economies of scale. And so, you know, it's a premium product, right? You get rarity factor, you know, they're beautifully done, they're made in Europe, but we don't have the economies of scale of, you know, made.com or these others that can do really beautiful things. But, you know, because you make them in China and you make, you know, 1,000 at a time, you can obviously get a different sort of price point. And so we do both. You know, we work with, you know, we've worked with the Crown Estate, which is, you know, the Queen's property portfolio, to dress some of their apartments, and we work to budgets. In other words, we work backwards. So someone has a, you know, whatever it is, you know, a 10,000 budget or whatever, we will work to that, work backwards and say, right, this is how we would do it to really maximize your sort of return. So that's the key thing I would say, is that, you know, for us, the furniture helps to sell a unit. And I think we've got so used to doing it now that, yeah, we're working with the Crown Estate. And if I dare say, we haven't signed the contract yet, but we've potentially got a really big one coming as well with another PLC as well, for, you know, who have hundreds and hundreds of units in central London, to help them with dressing and styling their, you know, some of their units as well. So it's a whole sort of business line. I think the, you know, the Ivor London furniture range, that is, it's a labor of love. It's you know, it's kind of in a way like a showcase of our best of the best. It's like, you know, if you want the best and you know, and you've got a budget to match, then, you know, and you want something different, that's what we do there, right? You know, and it's, you know, often it's totally bespoke as well. Like everything is, you know, the size adjusted, color adjusted, material adjusted. It gives you that rarity factor. It gives you something to talk about, right? Because again, if you do a good, successful interior, you want conversation pieces. You want to be able to sit down, right? You know, and so that's kind of what that's about.
We asked this question to a lady that we interviewed the other week, a lady called Ronnie. So she was an interior designer, again, central London, tends to be high end stuff. And I always find it really fascinating because sometimes people ask like for the weirdest things. And she was saying that she had someone that wanted a gold toilet in every room. Was it something like 8 toilets or something, wasn't it, Rob?
It was a lot of money worth.
Yeah, like 10 grand a toilet or something stupid. So have you ever had like a really wild request, like I need this, and it's like really specific and really strange?
I don't know, it's strange, but I mean, literally, I mean, it's quite funny you're asking, because right at the moment we've gone into sort of the dog business, basically, because we're literally doing 3 different pieces of sort of furniture or kit for dealing with sausage dogs. So we were asked, and funnily enough, actually, one of them is due to go into one of the Centrepoint apartments as well as elsewhere. But we were asked to come up with something slightly different to kind of look after their dogs. You know, they've got the lifestyle for everything else. You know, they've got the flats, you know, very successful individuals. You know, they've got these dogs. They love their dogs. They wanted the dogs to be, you know, to have a good lifestyle as well, right? And to sort of, you know, everything to fit in. And so we were like, what can we do to kind of make a dog basket more kind of interesting or a bit unusual? And so what we've decided to do is and literally this is kind of like a live project now, but you know how baskets normally on the ground? Well, we're building it up. So the basket's going to be like 40 or 50 centimeters above the ground, you know, on a ramp. And we just think it starts looking like a piece of furniture, and you can sort of have it by, let's say, a sofa area. And it just means that suddenly the dog is quite elevated. So instead of sort of looking down on the dog, you know, the dog is like a much better view, and it's much more engaging. I mean, just as a sort of example, say that, and then we're building we're designing a dog pen as well for these sausage dogs. So, you know, again, we're sort of like really keen that, you know, Amy is really keen that the dog can enjoy the view when they're going out for the evening. So they're kind of building this pen that they can get the view out from the windows. It's like we're doing a 2-level dog pen. So it means go downstairs, go, you know, pen, go to like the sort of, you know, the I think it's called a piddle or a paddle, or, you know, where they go basically go and do pee and stuff. And then they've got a ramp where they can come up. So it's kind of like it's like a house basically, right?
Amazing.
And really cool, really nice design, really functional, but at the same time, it's kind of epic for the dog as well.
I just see the dog sitting there with a pipe, just looking out the view.
Yeah,
and a Sherlock Holmes cat. these dogs have got better views of London than pretty much 99% of the population. What you're saying?
It's like a Snoop Dogg. Yeah, very cool dogs. I think it's a thing, and yeah, doing some gates as well. You know, to stop dogs going from one room to another, which honestly they're going to look so cool. So yeah, we're onto something, because actually we've got, obviously, you know, with like marketing advisors and, you know, stuff like that who help us out, and our Instagram account at Iver London Official, and you know, they're always saying, you know, it's really good when you get to do slightly quirky projects like this, because people love them basically, right? They're just quite fun. So yeah, we look forward to posting them on there.
And people spend fortunes on their dog. So Emily, my girlfriend, she runs like a personalized gifting company. And she's doing very, very well. But it's one of her biggest sellers is this dog basket with the dog's name printed on the front. And she can't sell them quick enough. Honestly, people absolutely adore buying stuff for their pets. And I think the Instagram factor is a really interesting one to say there, is that mainly because the most photos she gets from people, like customers sending in, are the dog in the dog basket with the dog name. People are literally buying these baskets just for the photo. And there's no other, they're just toy baskets, but they're buying it to put their dog in there for the photo. The amount of puppies in these baskets. But I think
the thing is they'll get those photos that will go on Instagram, then more people will see them and more people want to take that specific photo. So more purchases will come in.
Yeah. But just on, I think Instagram's a really interesting conversation actually, because I think restaurants have seen it in the fact that I think food has actually got better because of Instagram. I think more people are spending more, talking about dogs, you probably hear the dog barking now. People are spending more effort into making food look fantastic and taste fantastic because of Instagram, as they know that it's going to be shown. And I think you're seeing exactly the same in property now, is you're taking lifestyle photos. And we spoke about the other day when we talked about the Airbnb that I did. And you almost have to make it look like a magazine shoot, because people want to buy the lifestyle that they see in Instagram all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think it's probably, Instagram on the whole has probably been great for food and creative industry. Probably really pushed up standards.
Yeah, there'll be people out there saying it's put loads of pressure on it. It's taken away like the originality of it. Everyone's copying each other. But at the same time, I think I'm actually on the other side. I'm with you. I think it's actually made more competition, which has actually made people think harder and put more effort into stuff and bring in the level up.
Done both at the same time, I reckon, right? I mean, exactly. It's done both. Because on one hand, I think the average therefore is pushed up. And then, you know, there is that question of whether you remember those days when we used to be able to travel, but it's slightly weird now, isn't it? When you, let's say you go off to Thailand and you go into a room and it's just like, okay, this could be Croydon. Same, because everyone's looking at the same Instagram posts. And I guess that's just sort of, you know, a globalized world. But I think that's also the opportunity for, you know, businesses like Iver London and others to, you know, willing to do their own thing a bit. And that's kind of just kind of maybe last point actually on you know, our furniture collection, which I just really hadn't thought about when we were doing it. Because I say it was really a labor of love, kind of where, you know, I set out to do it. But it's kind of helped to give us a bit of an anchor, and made us really think hard about what we stand for in terms of design and look. Don't get me wrong, like so much of it is about flow and practicality, and creating a product that another person wants to buy and can then sell on. But beyond that, like, what do we stand for in terms of like, what is design, what is good design, how is design evolving, and trying to attempt some of those answers is what you see in our sort of furniture collection. And it keeps us honest, right? Because as you say, otherwise it's very, very easy where you sort of end up being, which is, there's no mistake in that at all, but it's being like, yeah, we don't have a view, we simply sort of copy paste. But it's you can see how very quickly you end up in a pastiche, right? Where it's like, okay, salmon pink is kind of on trend, slap dash, let's get a few curves in there. Let's get a few sort of cushions with big sort of, floral patterns on, and hey, presto, we've got a contemporary. And it's kind of true on the one hand, but you can also then see how you start going quite far from the original thinking about this sort of design. And so, yeah, I think that furniture collection helps keep us focused on kind of what is real design, and yeah.
And what's in store for the future? So where can you see Ivor London going? What's like the big grand plan?
I mean, to be honest, like I basically wake up every day and I just feel really lucky that I get to do this every day. I mean, that's the thing, right? I basically my sort of dreams have come true. I get to do, this is why I left law, right? Is to get to decide what I want to do, and to do something that I like really am passionate about and enjoy. And that's Ivor London, right? And so if I can continue, creating like homes that people want to live in, I'm really happy. I'd say what I want to, to give you like a specific answer, I'd say I want to get better and better and better at understanding the psychology of homes. There's a whole, I don't know if you read like the Alan de Botton sort of book on architecture, but it's absolutely fascinating read about sort of, how buildings make you feel. And I want to go from being enthusiastic and thoughtful about it to being kind of, I want to be brilliant. I really want to brilliantly understand the issues and the ingredients it takes to create homes that really make individuals and families and units feel good about themselves and feel content and happy. Because like, what an epic thing to do, right?
Yeah,
and then
definitely.
It's quite an old school, approach to sort of to making a living. But I sort of think that if you can aim to achieve a really good product, the money and the profit sort of follows from that, right? It's a kind of, I don't know, it's like Johnson & Johnson are famous for this, aren't they? It's sort of like, if you focus on the product and the customer, then everything else takes care of itself. And that's how I, very much of Ivor London, I try and live Ivor London, is that we try and look after the customer and we try and do like the best possible product. And then to a certain extent, everything else sort of follows. And so far, touch with that.
It's really nice because the way you've just described that, you can, like, it's going to sound corny, but you can actually really feel the love in what you're saying about what you do, which is really, really nice to hear.
I'd also just throw in for anyone thinking of starting their own business that you have to love what you do.
Patrick, I'm going to ask if for the listeners, obviously we've been talking about London and Central London and super prime London property. For those that are either investing in London already or looking to invest in London, and let's take what we've been talking about mainly is on adding value through refurbs to maybe flip or sell on, what would be your top 3 tips, your 3 most important things for being successful at doing that in London?
Okay, so first of all, and stop me if I'm not quite answering your question here, I have a horrible habit of doing this, but I say this to everyone, right, is you have to be really clear about why you're buying that property. Because I bet you for most of the listeners, right, are you actually buying your own home, but you want it to be a good investment. And straight away, you can see where there's a trap, right? And it's amazing how many people fall into it. Basically, is you've got to be totally clear, is do you want like something that makes you happy, or are you really focused on investment? As soon, you can try and merge the two, right? But you just have to really have your wits about you about why you're buying something. Because, you know, if you're buying something that's a miserable unit, but you think actually it could be really profitable, but then are you planning to live it for the next 3 or 5 years? That may not turn out to be such a smart thing to do, right? And vice versa, you know, you're buying, you know, you're buying this amazing home, but it may not actually be a brilliant, you know, it's going to probably go with the rest of the market. So first point, why are you buying that property? Simple question, but you'd be amazed how many people do not have an honest answer to that, or they haven't really thought about it in that way. So just pause, stop, think, and then almost, you know, put a percentage. It's 100% investment. It's 100% home. It's somewhere in the middle. And remember, the more you're in the middle, the more you need to be really, really clear about your decision-making process. Second, I would say, you know, if you want to make money, it's like know what you're talking about, right? So basically study the market. And it is incredible now, isn't it? With Rightmove, with Zoopla, you know, Prime Location, these kind of websites, anybody with a bit of effort can start to get a feel for what pricing is like in an area, right? You know, then after that, you can, you know, someone like me who's been probably look at 100 properties a day, and I have done for 15 years, you know, it starts being a different order of magnitude, right? Because I price things when I look at them. I don't even look at the price, you know, sort of, but anyone within a few hours of effort can start to get a good feel for what the kind of going price is in the area. Right? And you can break it down per square foot, and you start doing by the number of bedrooms, you know, there are a few parameters that you can start to use, right? And then, so I would say, you know, why are you buying it? And then I would say how, you know, understand the market. Number two, you know, is it expensive? Is it good value? Is it not? And be careful for traps. You know, is there a lift in the building or isn't there? If it's on the 4th floor and there isn't a lift, do you think that has an impact on the price or not? How much? Because if you ignore that kind of a factor, you might think, well, but it's 10% cheaper than the average in the area, but you're also ignoring factors that means that actually it should be 20% cheaper. So just open your eyes, look at the factors, break it down. What is it? It's a 4th bedroom apartment, walk up. It's got a good view on the front. It's got a really bad view in the back, or it's on a sort of 6-lane dual carriageway, or it's facing a cemetery, or it's facing a park, or, you know, the Heathrow, you know, flight path is overhead, or there's a rumble every 2 minutes from the Piccadilly line, or the communal areas look like it's sort of, you know, was last done in the 19th century, or, you know, the ceiling's really low, the ceiling's really high. You kind of catch the drift, right? That there are so many factors. So you've got to get this kind of benchmark of what do you think the average price in the market is? And then you've got to get good at understanding how to adjust a valuation according to these pluses and minuses, right, of all these different factors. You know, and is it refurbished? Isn't it? You know, and is that refurbishment good refurbishment or isn't it? You know, just sort of endless. And then after that, I would say, you know, so in there, you may already be making money now, right? And then after that, it's sort of something to look out for is always, can you add space? So it's something that we have, you know, as we've been discussing, right, we haven't been doing. But if you're buying somewhere, and typically this will be more kind of like in the, you know, I don't know, zones 2 and 3 and stuff, you're buying like a, you know, a house or a flat. Can you convert the loft? You know, can you do a rear extension? These things, somewhere like London, it's a pounds per square foot thing again, right? So if you know that it's going to cost you, I don't know, £100 a foot or £50 a foot to do an extension, but the value per square foot in the area is £300 a foot, it's money in the bag, right? So then, you know, to reduce your risk that you're not going to get that permission, go onto Google Maps, go onto satellite, and just see kind of if other houses in the area have done the same thing, and it starts giving you a good clue as to whether or not that's likely to happen. And so I would say that, you know, for someone who's, you know, most likely is probably buying their own home, but they want it to really work hard for them, then that's probably the smart way to go, right? You look for somewhere that kind of it's decently priced, doesn't have any like obvious negatives, or if it does, you've really understood what the negative is and it's priced accordingly. And then, for example, you have an ability to do, you know, rear, you know, side return or a rear extension or loft. They're very profitable because they're quite cost effective to do. They're probably the cheapest of the extensions to do. If you're more in central London and the price is per square foot, it can justify it, digging a hole in the ground. You know,
those Iceberg Homes are fascinating, aren't they? Because they're also when you go down and sort of like create extra floors underground, and some people are going down like 5-6 floors.
I mean, I'm quite close to one that is literally, I think, three floors down. Yeah, I mean, they are. It's insane. And they can go underneath the garden as well. So there's been a bit of a clampdown on it because there started being some cases where neighbouring properties were beginning to be affected. And it's always a question of insurance, right? Because everyone always sets up a limited company to do the development, but there are no assets behind it. So who do you go after if actually after a year or two, post the development, things start? So it's been a bit of a clampdown, but yeah, you're right. It's been a massive thing in central London. It's been these sort of iceberg.
If you can't go up, go down. You can't go side to side or back to front, go down.
Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer the question? I don't know if I steered off too much, but maybe that kind of vaguely said. Was that 3 points? That sort of top tips.
I think that was about 30 points, to be fair, but it's great. It's great.
And then if so, obviously they're like positive things. So have you made any like massive mistakes or sort of done things that you think actually a bit of knowledge now I would have done things differently? Is there anything that you sort of, if obviously a lot of people learn from people's mistakes, is there anything that you really stands out?
Biggest one is being nimble. So I think it was a mistake. It was correct, but it was a correct mistake. and what I'm referring to is that when you're doing development, again, you have to decide what your theme is. And actually probably one of the best ways of doing it, and I think that remains correct, is you follow the wave. There's normally property is typically a wave, right? There's often people saying that prices start going up or down in Chelsea, in central London, and then eventually that ripples across the rest of the country, sort of ending up in Northern Ireland or up in Scotland or wherever, right? And up and down. Maybe now there's that connection sort of slightly gone. But the decision I had to make quite early on in with Ivor was sort of do I follow? Do I go to different markets with Ivor London, or do I sort of stay put? And one of the things I decided quite early on was actually that I would really focus in on central London, prime central London, but certainly central London, like say tube map zone 1. And I took that view because I thought, well, actually by doing that, I can really get to know the type of customer, your avatar. Who is the type of person who buys an Ivor London home? Who are they? Are they from abroad? Are they from the UK? Are they families? Are they single people? What do they want? The more you understand them, the more you can do a product that they want. And obviously, the more you can understand, like we were talking about earlier, right? The more you understand the market, like how do you price things, right? Is that deal slapping you in the face, right? That's the honest question. And so to do that, you'd want to understand your market. So I took the view that I was better off, with Ivor London staying in the centre. But actually, you asked for the mistake, and actually that was also probably in hindsight probably the mistake, because property, it goes up and it goes down, and so we had a huge lift in central London that probably went all the way to sort of end of 13, beginning of 14. And then after that, we started to have a series of years where the market wasn't quite so easy. There have been a number of very significant tax changes. A number of groups of foreign buyers fell away for different reasons. There was a collapse in the oil price. There was a collapse in the Russian market. We had the Brexit, referendum. We had the Scottish referendum. We had, the threat of a Labour government, a number of occasions, each time killing the spring market. And so with hindsight, had I, gone to, East London or gone to, zones 2 or 3, I probably would have had another sort of 2 or 3 years of sort of more like, bubbling markets, right? I think now, when everything sort of came to a halt with COVID for a while. And so that's definitely something, right? I think if you're in this game, be mindful of like, what's your strategy? Are you chasing the curve? Are you a surfer? And actually, it's probably like the smart way to do this, right? Is you're always looking for the next big thing. Like, where is happening? Is it is it Leeds? Is it Liverpool? Is it Croydon? Is it somewhere in North London or somewhere in East London? These pockets. And if you can get in early and you get in on your project, and then you're doing a number of them, and then you're on the lookout, and you're kind of off you go again, in your camper van, finding the next place to sort of surf. And I think that's probably like the smartest, probably in many ways the smartest way of doing it. So because Ivor London, because we've been wanting to build, a little bit again because of the way I left and wanting to do something that I really enjoyed and wanting to build maybe a brand around what we do, because we do spend more time on each project. We do them we put a lot of work and effort, and a little bit more money goes into them, that we need to explain that to our audience. in a way, for the journey that I've been on, it's made sense to sort of maybe be a little bit more, don't get me wrong, we've done projects out in Malta and in France, and, and we sell our furniture is in Russia and it's in America. So, it's been amazing. But instead, we're targeting a type of property, right? We've decided very clearly that we want to be top of the game. That's what we do. And, that has meant that actually it's affected, you get some years where it will be thinner because, what's racing. Like if you think of the last 12 months, the stuff that everyone wants is stuff with a garden, right? We've had COVID, lockdown. Yeah. Do you want to be in prime central London right now? Actually, probably on reflection, you probably want to be in St. John's Wood, or you want to be somewhere else where you can get a bigger space, bigger garden. And, you catch the drift, right? And it's a bit like, I guess, stocks and shares, right?
It's that exposure, isn't it? You might be overly exposed in one certain area rather than diversify.
You're a day trader. You can make money in lots and lots of different ways. There is no right or wrong. I would simply say that, to summarize the answer to the question, which is, for me, that was a decision. I think in many ways it was correct for me, but actually, I'm very open about it. It's like, I probably could have had 2 or 3, those. Now I think it's a fascinating time to be in Prime Central. I wouldn't be anywhere else. I think this is, to be honest, is a really exciting place to be again. But there were 2 or 3 years where actually, had I gone off to Shoreditch or gone off to certain other parts of, Stoke Newington or some others, we could have, it could have been quite exciting. So I think that's something maybe for me to learn as well for future curves. But it's balancing that with, as I say, with my journey with Iver London, which is really trying to build a brand where we're positioning ourselves as always doing a premium product. And that means that what's right for us doesn't always mean chasing after the hottest and the latest kind of buzz area.
Brilliant. I think we've taken plenty of your time there, Patrick, so we'll do a little bit of a wrap up. So how can people follow you and follow your journey and get in touch and stuff?
Yeah. So our main sort of like portal is at Iver London Official, which is on Instagram. We'd love feedback on that as well. So we sort of played with different approaches on that, but we sort of approach we're going with now sort of quite fairly fast and fluid, basically, and just sort of like warts and all, and sort of showing some of the developments we're working on and how they're progressing, occasionally talking about sort of, investment opportunities, sometimes talking about furniture and design, sometimes highlighting other businesses or companies that we think are brilliant, sometimes showcasing some of our turnkey homes. And otherwise, of course, we've got our website, Iver London, ivarlondon.com.
Fantastic. And then if you want to follow us, you can at Podcast Property on all the socials and podcastproperty.co.uk. But no, really enjoyed that, Patrick. That was really, really good fun.
Thanks for coming on.
Because like me and Rob today, we like doing different parts, obviously, where you're talking about the high end of the market. Sometimes we might talk to developers that are building homes or doing sort of faster flips and loans. So it's really interesting to find out sort of more about that Central London. So thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Cheers,
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Property Investors Podcast. The information contained in the podcast is not to be used as financial advice. Everybody's situations and goals are different, and you should always complete your own due diligence on investments and seek personalised financial advice from a qualified person. Feel free to contact the show for professional recommendations. Visit propertyinvestorspodcast.com.